I thought my husband was boring, but I never imagined a single joke would destroy my marriage forever. I rolled my eyes and laughed. Seriously, your biggest accomplishment is marrying me. The room went silent. He just stared at me, and in that moment, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before: disappointment. I thought he'd brush it off. I thought we'd laugh about it later. I was wrong. I never thought of myself as the villain in my own story. I was just ambitious. At least, that's what I told myself. My name is Emily, and I always believed life should be something bigger than just existing. I was 28, living in California, chasing the idea of success, not just in career but in lifestyle. My social media was a highlight reel of picture-perfect moments, each post carefully curated to show the world that I was thriving. And for a while, I convinced myself that I was. Then there was Daniel, my husband. He was my opposite in every way: calm, steady, predictable. While I was busy capturing life through filters, he was content just living it. We met at a friend's birthday party 5 years ago. He wasn't flashy, didn't have some grand ambition to be famous or rich. He just had this quiet confidence, this way of making everything feel easy. I liked that about him at first. We got married 2 years later in a simple backyard ceremony. No extravagant venue, no designer dress, just love. At least that's what I told myself. Daniel didn't care about appearances. He cared about moments. He cared about me. But as the honeymoon phase faded, reality set in. Our life was small: modest apartment, average jobs, the same Friday night takeout and TV routine. At first, I tried to romanticize it, posting cute captions about our cozy nights in. But inside, I felt restless. I scrolled through my feed, seeing couples traveling the world, starting businesses, buying luxury homes, and I started wondering, why couldn't that be us? I wanted more. I wanted Daniel to want more, but he was content. And the more content he was, the more I resented him for it. I started pushing him. Why don't you ask for a promotion? Why don't we start a side hustle? Why don't you try harder? He'd just smile, shake his head, and say, Emily, we have enough. We're happy. But I wasn't happy, and I convinced myself it was his fault. Then came that night, the night I made the joke that changed everything. I thought it was harmless. I thought we'd laugh about it later. I never realized it would be the beginning of the end. After that night, something changed. It wasn't obvious at first: no screaming fights, no dramatic confrontations. But Daniel was different, quieter, distant. He still did the little things: brought me coffee in the morning, made sure my car had gas, held my hand while we watched TV, but there was something missing. I told myself I was imagining it, that he was just being sensitive, that he'd get over it. But deep down I knew. He had always been the calm one in our relationship, the one who never let things get to him. But that night at the party, when I made that joke, his only accomplishment was marrying me. Something in his eyes shifted. I had never seen that look before. Disappointment. At first, I pretended it didn't bother me. I kept posting, kept curating our life to look perfect online. Smiling selfies, brunch pictures, couple goals captions, but Daniel stopped appearing in them as much. He didn't protest, didn't argue, he just withdrew. I started to notice the little things. The way he no longer looked at me the same way when I spoke. The way he would nod along when I vented about my day, but stopped engaging. The way he'd go to bed early instead of staying up to talk like we used to. It irritated me. Why was he acting like this over one joke? I tried to shake the feeling by throwing myself into social media even more. I started going out with my friends more often, dressing up, making sure I looked good, posting pictures that screamed carefree, thriving, living my best life. Daniel never said anything, he just watched. One night, I came home late from dinner with my friends. He was already in bed, the room dark except for the dim glow of his phone. I slid under the covers, expecting him to turn over and at least acknowledge me. He didn't. Are you seriously still mad? I asked, my voice laced with frustration. He sighed, locking his phone before setting it aside. I'm not mad, Emily. Then what? He paused, then looked at me, really looked at me. I just don't know if you even respect me anymore. I scoffed, seriously, because of one joke. It wasn't just the joke. His voice was calm, but there was something final about it. It's everything: the way you talk to me, The way you always want me to be someone else. The way you act like I'm not enough for you. His words hit me harder than I expected, but I refused to let it show. That's not fair. I just want us to have a better life. No, Emily, you want a different life. One that doesn't include me the way I am. I rolled my eyes. You're being dramatic. He just shook his head, turning his back to me. I should have stopped then. I should have asked him what he meant, told him that I didn't mean to make him feel that way, but my pride wouldn't let me. Instead, I picked up my phone, scrolled through Instagram, and pretended that I didn't feel the growing distance between us. But it was there, and deep down I knew, if something didn't change soon, I was going to lose him. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to ruin my marriage. It was slow, subtle, like a rope fraying one strand at a time until suddenly it snaps. After that conversation, Daniel and I existed in this uncomfortable silence. We still lived together, still went through the motions, but something was missing. The warmth, the laughter, the effort. I told myself it was his fault. He was the one who shut down. He was the one who stopped trying. He was the one who made me feel like I was alone, even when he was right next to me. And loneliness does strange things to people. That's when I started talking to Ethan. He wasn't just some random guy. He was a coworker, someone I had always been friendly with. He was charming, funny, the kind of guy who always knew the right thing to say. And unlike Daniel, he paid attention. It started as harmless conversations. "You look stressed today," he'd say with a teasing smile. "Rough morning." And I'd roll my eyes, pretending I wasn't as flattered as I was. Just the usual, you know how it is. But the more distant Daniel became, the more I found myself looking forward to those little moments with Ethan. The small compliments, the inside jokes, the way he made me feel like I was interesting again, desirable again. One night, I was scrolling through my phone, lying in bed while Daniel sat across the room, barely acknowledging me. I saw a message from Ethan pop up. "Ethan, if you need a distraction, I know the perfect place." I stared at it, my heart racing for reasons I didn't want to admit. It wasn't cheating, not really. It was just harmless fun. A friend offering me an escape from the suffocating silence of my own marriage. At least, that's what I told myself when I typed back. "Me, what did you have in mind?" The night everything crossed the line. I met Ethan for drinks the next evening. It wasn't planned, at least, not in a way I'd admit to myself, but when he suggested it, I didn't say no. I told Daniel I was going out with some friends. He barely responded, just nodded and muttered, "Have fun." The bar was dimly lit, warm and buzzing with energy. Ethan was already there, a drink waiting for me. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," he said, smirking as he slid the glass toward me. "Why wouldn't I?" I sipped my drink, the alcohol burning in the best way. "Because," he leaned in slightly, his voice lower, more intimate, "you're still married." I felt my stomach twist, but I forced a laugh. "It's just drinks. That's not a crime, is it?" But we both knew it wasn't just drinks. As the night went on, the conversation got easier. The tension got heavier. At one point, I laughed at something he said, and he reached out, brushing my hand. It was barely a touch, a flicker of contact. But it sent a jolt through me. For the first time in a long time, I felt wanted. Not tolerated, not ignored, wanted. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded myself that this was dangerous, that I was playing with fire. But I didn't. Instead, I let my fingers linger for just a second too long. I let the moment stretch, let the possibility of something more hang in the air. And I liked it. The aftermaths. When I got home that night, Daniel was asleep. The room was dark, the only sound the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. I slipped into bed carefully, as if my guilt had a weight that might wake him. But the truth was, I didn't feel guilty, not in the way I should have. I felt alive. And that terrified me. Because if a single touch from another man could make me feel something I hadn't felt in years, what did that say about my marriage? And worse, did I even care anymore? I wish I could say that night with Ethan was a one-time thing. That I felt the heat of temptation, recognized my mistake, and stepped away before I did something I couldn't take back. But that's not how these things work. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how easy it had felt, about the way his touch had sent a thrill through me in a way Daniel hadn't in years. And so, when Ethan messaged me again, I didn't hesitate. Ethan, still thinking about last night. Me, a little. Ethan, I could tell, you didn't pull away. Me, maybe I didn't want to. It was dangerous, reckless, but I told myself it was harmless. After all, I hadn't technically done anything. But that was a lie. Because by the time Ethan and I met again, the line had already been crossed. The night everything fell apart. It was a Friday night. Daniel was home, sitting on the couch, flipping through the channels like he always did. The sight of him there, so predictable, so comfortable, made my skin crawl. I wanted excitement, I wanted passion, I wanted something that felt alive. So I lied. Tina invited me to dinner, I said, grabbing my coat. I'll be back later. Daniel barely looked up. Okay, have fun. That was it, no curiosity, no questions. He didn't even care. Or at least, that's what I told myself as I walked out the door and straight into Ethan's arms. We met at a rooftop bar downtown, the city lights glowing around us, making everything feel surreal. The drinks flowed, the conversation was effortless, and by the time he leaned in close, brushing his lips against my ear, I didn't hesitate. You don't have to go home tonight, he murmured. And for the first time since I got married, I seriously considered it. I wish I could say I made the right choice, that I stood up, left, and reminded myself that I was a married woman. But I didn't. I let him kiss me. And the moment our lips met, I knew I had gone too far. The moment of truth. I didn't sleep with him. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I drove home, my heart pounding in my chest. A kiss isn't cheating, I repeated in my head. It was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. It doesn't mean anything. But I knew that wasn't true. Because as I walked through the door, Daniel was waiting for me. And he knew. He was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought maybe I could play it off, act like nothing had happened. Hey, I said, forcing a smile, you're still up. He didn't respond right away, just studied me, his eyes colder than I had ever seen them. Who is he finally asked. My stomach dropped. What? Who is he, Emily? His voice was calm, too calm. I swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. I have no idea what you're talking about. He sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. I'm not an idiot, Emily. You've been different for weeks, distant, secretive, and tonight you came home looking guilty as hell. I felt the panic rising in my chest. Daniel, stop, you're being paranoid. Am I? He pulled out his phone, turning the screen toward me. A text message thread was open, my name at the top. And then I saw it. Me, maybe I didn't want to. Ethan's message, my response. Everything. My heart stopped. You went through my phone, I blurted out, grasping for anything to turn this around. No, he said, his voice sharp. You just forgot to log out of your laptop. I felt the blood drain from my face. Daniel, I can explain. Don't, his voice cracked just slightly. I don't want to hear whatever excuse you've come up with, I just want to know the truth. I hesitated. For a split second, I thought about lying, about spinning some story to downplay what had happened. But I couldn't. Because the truth was written all over his face. I had broken something we couldn't fix. I kissed him, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It was just once, it didn't mean anything. Daniel let out a breath, a long, shaky exhale, like he had been holding it in for hours. It meant something to me, he said. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't just another argument. This wasn't something we could brush off and move past. This was the end. The fallout begins. Daniel didn't yell. He didn't cry, he didn't even look angry. He just shut down. I think you should go, he said quietly, stepping back. Daniel, please. Emily, I can't do this. I can't be in a marriage where I have to wonder if my wife is in love with someone else. I felt the panic set in. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. He was supposed to fight for me. He was supposed to get angry, to tell me we could fix this. But he wasn't even looking at me anymore. I had spent so long chasing something more, convinced that Daniel wasn't enough for me. And now, standing there, watching the love drain from his eyes, I realized the truth. I was the one who wasn't enough for him. I didn't beg, I didn't argue. I just packed a bag and walked out the door. And as I stood outside, staring at the apartment that had once been my home, I finally understood. I hadn't just lost my husband. I had lost the only person who had ever truly loved me. I thought leaving would feel like freedom. Like stepping into a new life, full of possibilities. No more routine, no more predictability, no more Daniel holding me back. But the second I walked out that door, reality hit me like a brick. I had nowhere to go. I crashed at my friend Tina's place that night, still running on adrenaline, telling myself I'd done the right thing. That Daniel was too stubborn, too small-minded to see things the way I did. That this was just a temporary break, and he'd come to his senses. He's just being dramatic, I told Tina, sipping on the glass of wine she had handed me. He'll text me in a few days. He'll realize he can't live without me. Tina didn't respond right away, just gave me a look. What? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She sighed. Emily, you kissed another guy, and Daniel didn't even get mad. He just let you go. I scoffed, so maybe he's really done this time. I laughed it off, pretending like that thought didn't send a wave of nausea through me. Daniel wasn't done, he couldn't be. Right. Waiting for the text that never came. I gave it a week. A week of scrolling through my phone, waiting for his name to pop up. A week of keeping my posts vague but suggestive, pictures of drinks, of me laughing with friends, of nights out that were supposed to make me look carefree and thriving. But Daniel never texted. Never called. Never even liked a post. That's when the panic started creeping in. I told myself he's just waiting for me to make the first move, but my pride wouldn't let me. So I caved and texted him instead. Me, are we really doing this, just not talking? Hours passed, then finally 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. He didn't respond. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Reality hits hard. 2 weeks passed. Then a month. Tina, bless her heart, never kicked me out, but I could feel the tension. Her place was small and I was overstaying my welcome. And without Daniel, my finances were tight. It wasn't until I sat down to check my bank account that the full weight of my decision sank in. Rent, bills, groceries. All things I had never really worried about before, because Daniel had always been there, quietly making sure everything was taken care of. Now I was barely scraping by. For the first time, I saw my old life clearly, not as a prison but as something stable, something safe. And I had thrown it away for what? A few compliments from Ethan, a moment of excitement that fizzled the second reality set in. Ethan, by the way, was nowhere to be found. After that night at the bar, he had gone back to treating me like just another coworker. No flirty texts, no playful conversations. He had gotten what he wanted, proof that he could have me. And once he had that, I was no longer interesting. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I had destroyed my marriage for nothing. The final goodbye. It was nearly 2 months after I left when Daniel finally texted me. Not to ask how I was. Not to tell me he missed me. But to ask if I was coming to get the rest of my stuff. That was when I knew this wasn't a break. This was real. I told myself I wouldn't cry when I went back to our apartment. I wouldn't make a scene, wouldn't beg. But stepping inside, seeing how little had changed, except for the missing pieces of me, made my chest tighten. Daniel wasn't there when I arrived. He had left my things neatly packed in boxes by the door. And that hurt more than if he had thrown them out. Because it meant he had cared enough to be considerate, but not enough to fight for me anymore. I sat on the couch, the same couch we had spent so many nights on, laughing, watching movies, sharing quiet moments that I had taken for granted. And for the first time since I left, I let myself admit it. I had messed up. I had pushed him away, belittled him, made him feel small, all because he didn't fit the version of success I had created in my head. And now he was gone. And I had no one to blame but myself. I wrote him a note before I left. Not an apology, I wasn't ready for that. Just 5 simple words. I hope you're happy now. And then I walked out the door. For the last time. It's been 6 months since I walked out of our apartment for the last time. 6 months of waiting for a text that never came. 6 months of telling myself I was better off, that I had made the right decision, that Daniel would realize he missed me and come running back. But he never did. And now I know why. I lost a good man. Not because he wasn't enough, but because I was. Lessons learned too late. For weeks, I kept telling myself I could fix it, that if I just reached out, if I said the right thing, Daniel would take me back. But every time I picked up my phone, something stopped me. Because what would I even say? I'm sorry I treated you like a stepping stone instead of a person. I'm sorry I let my pride ruin us. I'm sorry I chased a fantasy and lost something real. None of it felt like enough. So I stayed silent. And eventually, I saw it, the post that shattered whatever hope I had left. Daniel standing in a park smiling, his arm wrapped around a woman I didn't recognize. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't dripping in designer labels or posing for the perfect shot. She looked normal, happy, at peace. And Daniel. For the first time in a long time, he looked the same. I stared at that photo for what felt like hours, my stomach twisting. It wasn't jealousy, not entirely. It was realization. He had moved on. Not just from me, but from the version of himself that spent years trying to be enough for someone who would never see him that way. And I knew, deep down, that she wouldn't make the same mistakes I did. She would appreciate the way he made her coffee in the mornings. She would laugh at his corny jokes instead of rolling her eyes. She would love him for who he was, not who she wished he could be. And I hated that it took losing him for me to finally understand the cost of my choices. I still think about him sometimes. Not in the way I used to, not with the desperate hope that he'll come back, or the fantasy that I could somehow undo everything. But in quiet moments. When I'm sitting alone in my apartment, eating dinner by myself. When I see a couple laughing at a joke, only they understand. When I wake up in the morning and realize there's no one next to me. That's when it hits the hardest. Because for all the excitement I thought I wanted, all the adventure I claimed to crave, what I miss most is the simple things. The way he always made sure I had an extra blanket at night. The way he'd pull me close during a movie, even when I was annoyed. The way he loved me quietly, steadily, without needing an audience. And I threw it all away. For what? A few compliments from a man who never cared, a fantasy that never existed, a version of life that was never real. The final thought. People always say, you don't appreciate what you have until it's gone. I used to think that was just a cliché. Now I know it's the truth. Daniel wasn't perfect, but he was good, and I had been so obsessed with the idea of more that I never stopped to see that I already had enough. Now it's too late. And the worst part. I still can't bring myself to say the words that might have saved us. I'm sorry. But maybe, even if I did, he's finally found someone who doesn't need to hear it. So, what do you think? Did I deserve to lose him, or was I just searching for something bigger? Would you have forgiven me if you were in Daniel's place? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Trust me, the next story, it's even crazier.